Hey class, welcome to week 2, module 2. This week we're going to cover chapters 7 and 8, and we'll be covering balance sheet analysis. So with that, I just wanted to talk about some of the major valuation policies of key financial statement items for the balance sheet. There are so many different policies that can be chosen for each one of these different balance sheet items, and they in turn can impact the business valuation pretty greatly. Let's just start with assets. So inventories, you can choose between LIFO, FIFO, weighted average method. A good example here, and I've mentioned it in the text, is if rising inventory prices are happening, then, and if you're using LIFO for your inventory method, then that's going to depress your net income and your gross margin because you are in effect expensing the higher priced inventory that you're selling. Current assets, accounts receivable, prepaid expenses. Accounts receivable, there's the direct write-off method and the allowance method. Don't think the direct write-off method actually is, you can use that under GAAP anymore, but they have significantly different effects in bad debt recognition. Long-term assets, leases, I'll talk about this in a second. Intangible assets. Now, you'll really want to pay attention to these and understand whether or not the intangible asset is fixed or it's perpetual. If it's fixed, then it's going to be amortized over a period of time. But if it's perpetual, meaning there's no fixed life like goodwill, then it has to be tested annually for impairment. So if you as an analyst, you're looking at the financial statements and you're looking at it midway, maybe 6 months after the financials have been issued, there's a possibility that the goodwill or the intangible asset that's perpetual has been impaired, but it has not yet been written off. So that's just something to keep in mind that could really impact the financial statements. Liabilities, special purpose entities. These are entities through which companies will funnel debt. They could, in the past, what has been done is companies have created these entities and have issued CDOs or collateralized debt obligations. That's been a big issue in the last 5 to 6 years. So there's a lot of new reporting requirements around that. So you should be able to research the notes or the annual report and find if there's any sort of SPEs related to the company. Off-balance sheet financing. This is effectively a loan or receivable that is not recognized as a liability or an asset, but it's denoted in the notes, or sometimes it may not be denoted in the notes, but they still exist. They're just arrangements that are not recorded. Leases, these are major items. You can either have a capital lease or an operating lease. Capital leases are capitalized, the present value of the lease is, and then it's taken off the balance sheet over time and recognized in the income statement, whereas the operating lease, it's only either expensed as a payment is made if you're a lessee, or if you're a lessor, then the revenue is received as the payment is received, and there's no sort of balance sheet capitalization or treatment or anything like that. Contingencies, this is more subjective in nature. So like a good example is litigation. If the general rule is if it is probable, which is defined as more likely than not to happen, then it's going to be recognized as a liability. But the problem with that is if it's probable, determining whether it's probable is subjective. So general counsel or the chief attorney in the company may feel pressure to not recognize a liability. And so they may decide that it's not probable and therefore would not be recognized, but it may still be listed in the notes. So you just have to pay attention to that. Retirement benefits, pension accounting. This is really complex accounting, like PBOs, pension benefit obligation. It's very, very complex accounting. Can't go into it here, but you'll just want to know that is complex and familiarize yourself with it if you're exposed to it in any sort of job in the future. Owner's equity. Now, the main takeaway here is to know if there are options, warrants, repurchase rights of an equity holder, or there's some sort of hybrid equity. And the reason why you'd want to know this is because if either you're a debt holder or an equity holder, and if there are hybrid securities out there, that means that if an event happens, or maybe it's just at your discretion, you decide that you want to convert your debt into equity. which then in turn dilutes the equity. So convertible types of securities have an impact on other equity holders or debt holders. So you just want to be familiar with that. Foreign currency translation. So companies who are operating in multiple countries, there are reporting requirements that you have to report in the functional currency, which is where you consider your primary mode of business, your primary place in which you operate. And so if you're also having operations in another country, you then have to translate those or convert those into the functional currency. And oftentimes there's a currency gain or a currency loss, and this currency gain or loss is recognized in AOCI, or accumulated other comprehensive income, which is under equity. And so you got to pay attention to that, because that could that impacts your equity. And if it's great enough, it could impact the income statement. And then, of course, legal limitations on distributions of stock. That's just referring to whether or not there is the prohibition on getting rid of a stock for a certain period of time, like a holding period. So, all right, that's the quick summary for the week. Just make sure you do the discussion board this week, and also the quiz, and of course read the text, and let me know if you have any questions. And that's it. Have a good week.